Did y'all like the a cappella this morning? Wasn't that beautiful? I'll tell you, y'all are great with instruments, but your voices are phenomenal. So thank you for leading us so powerfully in worship this morning. So last week, we started this new sermon series for the summer called Rethink Church. And the reason we're doing that is because we recognize there was a time when the church was vibrant. There was a time when the church was alive, when the church was bold and daring and risky and effective at connecting people with Jesus Christ. And that's still happening in some places in the world, but in our nation, it's really not. That's not who we are anymore. In fact, we're recognized by other nations as a heathen nation, and we are the third, how to say this? They're sending missionaries to us. We're third place in that. Does that make sense? There are two other places in the world where they send more missionaries. The United States is third highest recipient of missionaries for Jesus Christ being received, not being sent. Isn't that amazing? South Korea sends the most missionaries out in the name of Jesus in every nation in the world. And we're the third highest at receiving missionaries. That's who we are anymore. Census figures tell us, the data is clear, that nearly 70% of the people living around us, in our area right here, in Penn Township and all around our general area, 70% of our people are unchurched. And I would say that number is a bit skewed because when they make their phone calls to do those things, if you're at a funeral at a church in the last year, you're churched. That's not my definition of being churched, but that's theirs. So I raised up to about 75% in my own thinking. So roughly 3/4 of the people around us have no meaningful connection to any church or church body at all. Those are your neighbors, those are your friends, those are your coworkers, those are kids that go to school with you during the school year, not in the summer. That's where we're living. That's our nation right now. So we're rethinking church. Now, I think here at Community, we're doing a better job than some, but we don't have it all figured out yet. We're not like the great model, hey, come and look what we're doing, because we're not doing it. I mean, this morning, this is great. We're loaded up. I feel sorry y'all are sitting against a wall back there. I apologize for that. Every chair, I think, out being used. But we've still got a ways to go here. There are a lot of churches that are hemorrhaging. There are more distractions from Christ than decisions for Christ. There are more funerals and baptisms. And those that are staying in the churches are not proving effective. We're watching this happen, that culture is influencing the church more than church is influencing culture because the church is being ineffective. And that's who we are. So it's time for us to rethink church. You know, here at Community Church, we have a team of people, leaders that lead us to do this. But I want to tell you that one of my favorite teams in the church is our worship team, not our praise and worship team. I love them too. But we have a team of people in this church led by Rick Delicave, who's also known as Conga Awesomeness. You saw him up here playing congas. He's a chairperson of how we do worship here for upstairs, downstairs. And we strive to make worship meaningful and mean something as people enter in. And so to that end, let's pray that we just let God have his way in this worship service today. We want to make sure that we are following God's leading to make worship that which honors and glorifies his name. Let's pray for a moment. Father God, we don't want to miss what you're doing. We're so excited about the growth of this church and the way you're bringing in members, but God, there's so much more than that. We don't want to just grow wide. We want to grow deep. We don't want to just make members. We want to make disciples. Jesus, we want to make sure that we're not just being attractional. We're being missional. So Jesus, help us to learn how to do that as we rethink church. And this morning specifically, and next week specifically, we're going to talk about worship, Lord. And God, you have a heart for that. You have a heart for worship. And so, Jesus, I pray that as we talk about worship, we would not hear a pastor's voice, but we would hear your voice. We wouldn't hear some written word on the pages up here printed out of a printer, but we would hear your word speaking clearly and defining very well what worship is. So, Christ, to you be the glory as we talk about worship today. In your name, Jesus, we pray it. Amen. So friends, when we rethink church, we have to begin by rethinking worship. And here's why. Worship is so absolutely near and dear to God's heart. When most people think about church, that's what they think about is worship. Hey, where do you go to church? And they think about the worship service, the worship experience. Hey, I went to church today. I went to worship today. That's where most people minds go. When I was serving my previous church over in the Munhall, West Mifflin area, I had a high school student come up to me one day. She said, hey, Pastor Rich, do you know what we're known as in the high school, in West Mifflin High School? And I dared not answer. You know, I hope it's something good. She said, it is. We're known as the happy church because our worship is so happy all the time. You know, and yes, we dealt with serious things, and worship was meaningful and serious, but it really, truly was a joyful expression of our love for God. Whether you came to traditional or blended or contemporary worship, it was joyful worship. And so we were known for that. The psalmist writes it this way, speaking of just how we live life as worship. He says, shout for joy to the Lord. Worship the Lord with gladness. I know, but y'all, I've worshiped in a lot of churches. They worship the Lord in sadness. You know, I walked into worship services with people. I thought they were going to a funeral. They were going into worship. They looked more sad than like a kid that lost his puppy. It really was defeating before I even entered into worship. If I was in that worship service, some of those churches, and I didn't know who God was, and I was walking in to hear about God for the very first time, I would think that God was dead, and they were coming to bury him. You know, the psalmist says, worship the Lord with gladness. And he says a few verses later, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. When we come into worship, we should be known and recognized and have this sense of tremendous celebration. But Pastor Rich, I didn't have a very good week. Granted. You know, me neither. My week was busy. My week hurt. My week was grievous with some people. But you know what? In the midst of even the hardship, I have a God that loves me. I have a God that cares about those things in my life. I have a God that says, I'm still on the throne. And so I can come in to worship him with joy and gladness, even though my heart might be sad. Worship. Most people define church by worship experience, but it's not always happy. Most people use words like dull, or boring, or irrelevant. Now, I've led a lot of classes. I've spoken a lot of conferences when people of different churches come together, and if I'm teaching on church growth or on worship, and more specifically, one of the questions I always love to ask the class before me is, would you invite people to your worship service? And I've never really done a study, a tally, but I can tell you from experience, 95% of the time, you know what the people say? They say no. I say, are you kidding me? They say, no, we wouldn't invite people to our worship service. Why not? Because it's boring. It would not mean anything to people I would invite. Then you need to go to talk to your pastor. You know, boring, that's not worship. I remember one of my first times I was preaching. I was down in South Georgia where I started out, and I was at a church, and my father-in-law and mother-in-law were coming for the first time to hear me preach. So I was like really, really nervous. And I was really super nervous because he was a very highly esteemed leader in that conference. He was a district superintendent, one of the most respected district superintendents they've ever had in South Georgia. And there he sat in the back of the sanctuary, smiling at me the whole time. I'm thinking, what are you thinking the whole time, you know? And so as soon as the worship service was over, I go back and I'm meeting and greeting people, and I go right to my father-in-law and I say, hey, Burns, what'd you think of worship today? He said, man, worship was exciting. He said, Rich, worship should be many things, but it should never, ever be boring. And he's absolutely right. Worship is too important to God's heart. Listen, I would venture to say that worship is more important to God's heart than anything else that you do with your faith. It's more important than the way you love each other. It's more important than the way you serve in his name. It's more important than a mission trip to Uganda. Those are all really great and super important. But when it comes to the very most important thing on God's heart for you, is how you love him and express that through worship. We're going to talk about that for a few minutes this morning, but it's important for us to think about this because you know that when people come into a worship service, they make up their minds about whether they're ever coming back in about 2 minutes. Did you know that? That's statistically speaking. And that shouldn't be odd to us because the reality is you do that in everyday life, right? Let's say that you're walking down the mall and you know there's a new store down on this side of the mall. it went in right beside the store you like to shop at, but you want to check out this new store, and you stand out beside this new store, and how long is it going to take you to decide if you're going to go in there and spend your money? 30 seconds? Right? Because you're going to look at a number of factors. Number one, you're going to look inside and say, what does it look like inside? And what kind of things are they selling? Is it my style of clothing, if that's what they're selling? You're going to listen to the music. What kind of music is coming out? If it's grunge music, you may not go in. Others may fly in there. Yeah? If it's Beethoven, you might say, this is my taste. And others are going to shy away from it. So you're going to listen to this style of music. You're going to look at the salespeople. Are they friendly and helpful? Or are they kind of over there chatting and FaceTiming, other people while they should be helping you? So all those factors come into play, but it's going to take you about 30 seconds to decide whether or not you're going to go in and spend your money and be a frequent flyer there. We live in that sort of a culture. It's a very consumer culture, and the church is no different. People church shop. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's where we are. And we're smart to know that, but that's not why we're rethinking worship. We want to keep tabs on those things. But we want to rethink worship because, again, worship is so important to God's heart. How you worship Him matters to Him. And for the most part, we've lost the value of worship. But we're not the first generation to do so. If you follow the timeline back through the history of God's people, you find that there's so many times they started as God's people in worship. It was vibrant and exciting and meaningful, and they were expressing their love for God for a little while. And then a few weeks or a few months or a few years go by, and pretty soon God's kind of pushed to the periphery, and sometimes forgotten completely, and they're not even worshiping anymore. And so what God would do is God would step in and say, hey, y'all have kind of lost the value of worship, so we're going to restart, we're going to rethink church. And 90% of the time, 9 times out of 10, God said, we're going to start by rethinking worship. And I want to show you what that looks like today because it sets a pattern for what we need to do as we rethink worship in our lives. And this morning, as we talk through this passage of Scripture, this experience in the people of God's in their lives, I'm going to challenge you with 3 choices you've got to make concerning the way you worship. It's going to be very, very relevant to how you're living your life as a God's person today. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to go back to a time in the history of God's people when they were gathered around a place called Mount Sinai. And I understand that maybe you didn't grow up in church. Maybe church is new to you. You maybe didn't learn about flannel board Jesus and all the other stuff in Sunday school back in those days. So I'm going to catch you up. I'm going to bring you up to speed on Mount Sinai. Maybe you've never heard about that. There was a time when God's people were slaves in the land of Egypt. And they cried out to God, and God heard their cry. And so God said, I'm going to send a person to you. And God sent the person named, that's sad. God sent the person named, now y'all, listen, I know some of you didn't grow up going to church, but most of you did, right? So you ought to know who God sent, right? I hear these whispers. God sent a guy named Moses to rescue them. And Moses goes in, but there's a problem, right? The Egyptians are like, no, you're not taking our free labor out of here. That means we have to start making our own bricks, man. We're not going to do that. Our hands are too delicate for that. This is our labor force. And so they put up a barricade, in a sense, and the Pharaoh says, no way, Jose. And Moses says, well, we're going to have to unleash God's power on you. God says, watch me work some miracles now. And God works all these miracles. We call them the plagues, but God works all these miracles for His people to see, for the Egyptians to see. And he says to His people, hey, by the way, not only am I going to free you, not only are you going to walk out of the land of Egypt, but when you do, you're going to plunder the Egyptians as you leave. And so God starts working all these miracles, and the Israelites, just like God said, then they leave Egypt. And the Egyptians, after they finally relented and said, go, please get out of here, they see them going and thought, wait a minute, that was a mistake. And so they mount their chariots and they get their armies and they start following the Israelites to track them down and bring them back. But God, to protect them and to lead them, says, hey, let me do some more miracle work. And God sets a pillar of smoke and vapor in front of them to lead them. And then behind them at night, He sets a pillar of fire. And actually turns into a wall of fire because the Egyptians were catching up. And eventually, the Israelites get to the border of the Red Sea. This is like an impassable sea. They can't swim it. They can't boat it. They can't get across of it, all these tens of hundreds of thousands of people. And the Egyptians are hot on their heels, so God says, why don't you spread my fire across here and blockade them? And people said, what are we supposed to do about the water in front of us? And God says, watch this. Whoop, and he parts the Red Sea. You heard about that, right? Parting the Red Sea. He parts the Red Sea. The water stands up. It's miraculous on both sides. And all these hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people walk through on dry ground. And when they get the whole way across, God releases his wall of fire. The Egyptians say, hey, we can do the same thing. They get out there in the very middle of it, and what happens? Yeah, it comes flooding back in. God releases the walls of water, drowns them all, and they all die. And all the Egyptians die, all the Israelites on the other shore looking back say, wow, our God's an awesome God. And that leads them right up into the place called Mount Sinai. So let's get with God there. God said, I have brought you to this Mount Sinai place. You've been chased. You've been slaves for a long time. This is all kind of new to you. Let's kind of reestablish our relationship. Let's reestablish our covenant. Let's kind of take a breath right here. Let's camp out for a little bit, and let's set some boundaries and talk about who you are and who I am and how we're going to live together. And so that's where we are. If you've got your Bibles, that sounds like way to go. Like you're super excited about the Bible this morning. If you've got your Bibles, way to go. Exodus chapter 19. We're going to bounce around a little bit. We're going to start verses 1 through 8. Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 through 8. Here's what we read. On the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain, Mount Sinai. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you're to say to the descendants of Jacob, what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now let's stop right there because this is super important. Where did God bring his people? Where did God lead his people? Yeah, I hear two answers. To Mount Sinai, yes. Physically and practically, yes, to Mount Sinai. But the reality is, where did God bring his people? To himself. Isn't that cool? God could have taken them anywhere in the world. But he said, I want you to know I brought you to myself. I brought you to myself. Then he said this. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. I want you to notice something here too. First, the parameters that God sets. Notice how God says, hey, the whole earth is mine. He's telling them who he is. Everything of all creation, I made it, I own it, it all belongs to me. It's all mine. He's not being selfish, he's just being truthful. It all belongs to him. So he's saying, this is who I am. But secondly, he's saying, here's who I'm inviting you to become. He said, I'm going to make you into a kingdom of priests. Now, what do you know about priests? What do priests do? He's defining the relationship. He calls them priests. What do priests do? They lead worship, right? They lead worship. As God, notice this, as God is defining the parameters of his relationship with his people, he said, here's who I am, here's who you are, and I'm defining this relationship beginning with the language of worship. God believes that much in worship. Here's what happened next, verse 7. So Moses went back, and he summoned the elders of the people, and he set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. Something important right here. Do you notice that God does not force himself on them? God's not saying, this is the way it is, period, get in line. He said, hey, Moses, go tell the people what I've said and bring an answer back to me. Are they in or are they not in? The choice is up to them. I love the fact that God lets us choose. He doesn't force himself onto you. He says, this is who I am, who I'm inviting you to be. If you want to be a part of this, I'm inviting you. Give me your answer. And he sets that before them, and Moses, like a ping pong ball going back and forth, comes back and he says, hey, they're in. They're all in. And friends, this leads us into the first decision they had to make. And this is the first decision you got to make about your worship for your life as well. And it's simply as number one, choice you need to make is number one, choose who you're going to worship. See, here's the thing. You're going to worship something or someone. I don't care who you are, if you're a churchgoer or not, you are going to worship someone or something. See, worship simply means this, ascribing worth to, and we all do that. We ascribe worth to things in life. An easy way to remember the meaning of worship is simply this. Worship equals worthship. It's what you ascribe worth to. Anything you're ascribing worth to is what you worship. It's what you give yourself to. It's what you ascribe honor to. And God's very, very clear about this. The moment that people said yes to his invitation, he gave them the conditions of his covenant. Part of this is what we call the Ten Commandments. You read a couple verses further, he's given them 10 commandments. And the first two are very basic and very simple and very straightforward. Do you remember the first one? God said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. You shall have what? No other gods before me. What's he saying? He's saying, hey, choose who you're going to worship. Don't put any other gods alongside of me. I'm the one true God. Worship me. The second commandment went along the same lines. It went like this. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. He's saying the exact same thing. Choose who you're going to worship. If you're in covenant with me, you worship me. Here's the thing. Again, you're wired to worship God. But God knows you're distracted by and easily follow a lot of other things. It's easy to give worth to things that don't deserve it, right? There's nothing wrong with enjoying the things of life. They're gifts that God gives us. But when you put them higher than they ought to be, when you make them a higher priority than they should be, when they begin to steal your attention and your worship from God, then those things are out of order. When they take your attention from God, you're beginning to worship them more than God. They become an idol to you. God knows this about you, so right out of the gates, he sets his expectation. Worship me. And so you got to make a choice. You need to choose in life who you're going to worship. But there's another choice I want you to understand as well. Number one, choose who you're going to worship. Number two, choose why. Choose why you're going to worship. Did you notice that we read through that passage of Scripture? God kept reminding them who he was. Hey, you've seen what I've done. Hey, you've been the recipient of all these miracles. God just keeps telling them over and over and over again. Why does he keep doing that? He's giving them the reason why. This is who I am. This is what I've done. As they're gathered around the mountain, he says, you've seen what I did to Egypt. You know what I've done. Remember the parting of the sea? Remember the fire? Remember the pillar? Remember all those things? That was me. He's giving them reason to worship him. And giving them the 10 Commandments, he said this, Exodus 20, verse 22. You've seen that I've spoken to you from heaven. It's as fresh as the day he was speaking to them. Reason. Over and over again, God reminds the people of who he is and what he's done. They had reason to worship God. If God had not done anything spectacular, I think it would have been hard for them to worship him in a spectacular way. God showed himself in amazing ways, and he still does. It may be the wonder of creation. Listen, I don't know. I had someone walk in this morning. Wally, was Wally in this service? Yeah, Wally's back here somewhere. He was upstairs. He comes to worship all the time. But he walked in early this morning. He said, man, Pastor, I don't know how anybody couldn't get up today and just want to worship God at the beauty of this day. I can just imagine the excited, exuberant ecstasy of the psalmist when he wrote, hey, the heavens declare your glory, O God, and the earth shows forth the work of your hands. I mean, he was just worshiping God because of what he saw around him. There's no excuse. Before our eyes and within our ears, every day we're watching the wonders of God unfold. And God says, you're a fool if you don't recognize who I am and worship me because of that alone. That's just who God is. Reason why. I believe God has given these things as gifts to us to give us reason why to worship him. It may be the grandeur of creation. Maybe you can just look back in your life. Can you look back and see how God has worked? All those reasons why you should worship him. Yesterday afternoon, I had the privilege of doing a wedding for a friend. Big difference. But this is a young lady who we just loved for about the last 10 years. Has been a real special close friend of Marcia. And her name is Charity, and her fiance, they got married. Now her husband is named Carter. And we just really enjoy Carter too. And so we were privileged. Marcia was singing, and I was doing the wedding out of town yesterday. And it was just a wedding, I just tell you, that turned into worship. It was this wedding where they designed it, Carter and Charity, because they love God so much. They wanted it to be a worship service more than a wedding. So I kid you not, during their wedding, we stopped the wedding and set up and just worshiped God. Marcia got up and led this worship song they had planned, the stand. And the congregation stood, and they all just worshiped God in the middle of a wedding. It was so cool. And then during their wedding, we just stopped and said, hey, if you want to pray over Carter and Charity, we're going to have an open time of extended prayer. And people from the congregation started praying over Carter and Charity in the middle of the wedding. The wedding turned into worship. It was so cool because that's how they designed it, because they just loved the Lord so much. Then after the wedding, we went into the reception there in the church fellowship hall where we were. And Carter's got all these brothers. And each one got up to share part of the toast. And they're saying all these great things, how much they love their brother and stupid stuff he's done. You know how brothers do. But every time they just said, and can I just pray over Carter and Charity? And so every time, every brother got up and shared, they would pray over them. One brother got up in particular, and this is what I want to get to. His name is Matt. And Matt's a great guy. He's a doctor at Grove City Hospital, just a really, really neat guy, just a lover of Jesus Christ. And he gets up, and he says, Aaliyah, I want you to come to the front. And Aaliyah is Charity's daughter. See, both Carter and Aaliyah come from broken marriages of no fault of their own. They just got hammered by their previous spouses. So they come like the Brady Bunch. Carter's got all boys, and Charity's got a girl named Aaliyah. And so Aaliyah comes kind of skipping up to the front where Matt was, her new uncle Matt. And he looks at her, and she's standing there in this beautiful, sparkly white princess gown, all 9 or 10 years of her. And she's got this tiara on her head, and she's just princess all over. And she's looking up at him because he's a pretty big guy. And he's looking down at her, and he says, Aaliyah, I want you to know something. Today, your new dad didn't just get a new wife. He got a new daughter. A daughter that he's never had, a daughter he's always wanted. And you're his new daughter. And this, is a really, really touching moment. But Matt kept talking. He said, and beyond that, I want you to know that in our family, names are very, very important. In fact, we name our kids using family names. That's been going on for generations. And he said, Aaliyah, your new dad, his middle name is Lee. And he went back in history and said, when we were younger, we always talked about what it would be like when we got married and when we had kids, as brothers. And Carter, the groom, the new dad, he said, your new dad told me way back a long, long time ago, before we even knew you, that if he ever had a daughter, he would name her Aaliyah, because names are important in our family. He said, Aaliyah, I want you to know that God named you a long time ago because he knew you can be part of our family and how important that is to him. And so meanwhile, I looked around the room, and everybody, all the women are like with tissues crying, and all the guys are like, I'm not going to cry, I'm crying. But do you know why Carter and Charity made their wedding a worship service to worship God? Because they look back and they see how God has worked so tremendously in their lives. Tell me that Aaliyah, God didn't know that was going to be her name before she was born, and brought into a family where names are important. That was just a God movement. So they look back over their history and they see how God has moved. They have reason. They know the why of worshiping him. I hope you can begin to do the same. Take note of what God is doing and choose your why. One more choice you need to make about worship. Don't only have to choose who you're going to worship and choose why you're going to worship, but friends, I'm going to encourage you to really know to choose how you're going to worship. And listen, I say that, I don't mean, by lifting your hands or not lifting your hands, by clapping along or singing out loud or sitting quietly. I'm not talking about how you express worship. My belief is God doesn't care how you worship, just so you worship. He doesn't care if it's current, doesn't care if it's traditional, doesn't care if it's country western, doesn't care if it's hipster. He doesn't care how you worship. If it honors him, then it's worship, and he loves it. I believe that wholeheartedly. So but I want to explain to you what I mean by how to worship. And let me explain it like this. If you keep reading in Exodus, while all the people are camped around the base of Mount Sinai, God calls Moses up onto the mountain of Sinai. And he begins to lay out for Moses more things about his people, what he wants them to know. He talks about the furniture and the items that are going to be used in worship of him. In fact, from chapter 21 to verse 31, that's all it's about. Hey, what are the priests supposed to wear, and what items you need in this new space where you're going to worship me. He talks about the altar and the washing basin and the candlesticks and the holy table and all those things. He describes all that. That's happening up on the mountain. But meanwhile, down at the base of the mountain, something radically different is happening. Remember I told you we're wired to worship? Well, the people of Israel down there, and they're wired to worship. And they're like, hey, Aaron, who was Moses' brother, Aaron, like we don't know about this Moses guy. He's been gone 40 days. We think he's just taken off. You make us gods to worship. And so Aaron says, okay, give me all the gold, all the earrings and bracelets and necklaces you all have, and bring them to me. Now, does that strike you as odd in any way? Who was he addressing when he said that? The Israelites, right? And who were the Israelites? For the past, 10 generations, they were... How many slaves that are rich? How many slaves going around wearing the wealth of jewelry? Gold earrings and gold bracelets and gold necklaces and silver and bronze and precious stones. How many slaves do you know that are walking around that wealthy? So the question is, where did they get it? Remember what God said? Marcy knows it. The Egyptians. Remember God said, hey, not only are you going to leave this country, but when you do, you're going to plunder them as you go. God said, hey, when you're ready to leave, I'm going to tell you, wives or Israelite women, I want you to go to your neighbors and say your Egyptian neighbors, hey, give us your jewelry. I'm going to predispose their hearts. I'm going to give it to you. That's exactly what happened. They said, hey, we're leaving. Could we have all your jewelry? And the Egyptian women said, yeah, take it. And they gave it to them. That's what God does. And so these people are walking out, no longer slaves. Now they're free, but now they're rich and free, right? And it just makes me wonder why. God, why? Why give them jewelry to wear out into the desert? Why give them all this treasure? Because what he was talking to Moses about on the mountain. He's saying, hey, build this table. Hey, build this washing basin. Hey, build this altar. Hey, build these candlesticks. Well, you know what they're supposed to be building those things out of? Gold and silver and precious stones and precious metals, all the things they didn't have, God provided for them to use in their worship experience of him. Does that make sense? God provided everything they were going to need to worship him. But down at the base of the mountain, the people are taking all those things God provided and they're giving them to Aaron to make some false god, some idol for them to worship. And so Aaron takes all this gold and he puts it in the fire. And the scripture, it's funny, there are two versions of this. There's the account that tells us what happened. Then there's Aaron's version, what he tells Moses later. So the account that actually happened, it says he took all this gold, all this jewelry, he melts it down, he uses carving tools, and he carves a calf out of this precious metal, puts it before the people and says, here's your God, worship. Meanwhile, Moses comes back down out of the mountain. He says, Aaron, brother, man, what are you thinking? And Aaron's like, I don't know what happened. I just took all this gold, threw it in the fire, and poof, a calf popped out. It literally, you can go back and read it. That's what he says. It just appeared like that. They chose how to use what God gave them to worship in a very wrong way. How does that make you feel? God provided all this stuff for them to worship, and then they use it for a false god. What does that do to you? No, seriously, how does it make you feel? No, really, you're allowed to answer. I'm not. You get to say something because my next line depends on what you say.
Yeah, sad.
Sad, yes. It makes you feel sad. What else does it make you feel? Mad, yeah? Yeah, mad, upset, frustrated. Man, how can they do that? But hold on, don't be haters. Don't we dare judge. Because you and I, you know what's coming, right? We do exactly the same thing. You want me to prove it to you? How many of you believe God gave you your job? Do you believe God gave you your job? I believe God gives us jobs. I believe that God has equipped us, and if we're following Him as a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ, He gives us the jobs that we have. He provides for us in that way. If that's true, then He's giving you your paycheck. Can we begin to compare dollars of what you give to God versus what you spend in the world? God has given you what you have. He's provided for you to use for His glory. I will bet, I'm not a betting man, but I would guess you spend more on cable than you will give to God this month. I would guess for many of us, you're going to spend more going to the movies this week than you gave to God this week. I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm just telling you what I believe. It is. Should we go further? Yeah, please, because it feels so good, Pastor Rich. I think, money is a great way to do that, but also what about your time? How many hours in a day, do you know? This is not rocket science. How many hours in a day? 24. How many hours are in a week? 168. Okay, I'll give you the answer. 168 hours in a week. How many hours are you going to give to God out of those 168? What, 2? And that includes driving time. Right? Really? What's that come out to be? Tad, you're smart. What, 1%? Barely. 1% of your time this week you're going to give to God. If this is your time you give to God, if this is it, if you give 2 hours to God, 1% of your time, tell me you don't have idols. God is not giving, you're not giving to God what He's provided you to give to Him. And I'm guilty too. I'm with you. I'm with you in this. I'm just saying, listen, I labored over this message. God was just nailing me left and right. I have no choice but to share it with you. Should we keep going? Okay. Yeah, you're loving this. How about your giftedness? How about your voice? I know. You're one of my favorite worshipers, actually. Your voice. How much time are you going to use your voice to sing the crappy, worldly songs on the radio versus how much you're going to use your voice to lift praise to God this week? I bet it's a very unbalanced amount. I'll bet God gets the lesser end of that. What about your giftedness? What about your athletic ability or your music ability or any of the other gifts God has given you? My hunch is you and I have more idols than we care to admit. It may not be a golden calf, but I don't know. Are you spending more time on Facebook than in this book? I believe most of us are. Are you spending more time on connecting with people through Twitter account than you are connecting with God through a prayer account? I'm just telling you, we've got idols. And we need to begin to name those. And those things aren't wrong. I'm not telling you get rid of all that stuff. I'm just saying make sure it's in the right order. We have to rethink our worship. We have to choose who we're going to worship and why we're going to worship and how we're going to worship. Will you begin to worship God with everything He's given you? See, I find in my life, I've taken off my earrings and jewelry, all the gold God's given me, and I've used it for other stuff. So I'm rethinking worship with you. My hope is that together we'll rethink worship, and we're going to blow the doors off meeting times like this, where worship is going to be so much more vibrant and alive, even than it is now. This morning, I hope you came into worship. I don't know if you entered into worship. I hope you did. I hope that you were moved in worship today. I hope you were caught up to give God glory in worship. But if you haven't, I want to tell you it's not too late this morning. There's still a little bit more worship to go on. I'm going to invite our team to come back up to the front and to prepare to lead us in our final few acts of worship. But right now, we're going to give you 3 more opportunities to worship. Actually, maybe 4. We're going to sing a final song. I hope you're going to use your voice. God gave you your voice. Will you use it for Him in worship this morning? We're going to sing a final song in a moment. It's really a cool song. It becomes like a covenant song. It talks about who God is and who we get to become, and we make a stand. It's called The Stand. We make a stand to be everything God wants us to be, and we can do that in worship this morning. We're also going to take up the offering. We just talked about that. What you're going to spend on other stuff this week versus what you give to God. And some of you are new. You're thinking, man, he's talking about money. I do. And I make no apologies for it because God doesn't. This is what God has commanded us to do. And if you're a follower of Christ, this is what God holds you accountable to. So we have our folks come around in a moment during the song. And they're going to pass baskets. But also, if you want to worship through song, you can worship through giving. You can also worship through prayer. This altar is open. The prayer room is open. We want you to make use of those in any way that you need to. And we invite you to worship God in that way. So let me do this. Let me ask you to stand. And I'm going to just lead us into prayer, and then we're going to worship God through these 3 acts of worship to close. So Father God, here we are. If we've not yet entered into worship, Jesus, today, right now, let us enter in fully. And God, may the song we're about to sing become the song of our hearts and a song of worship for us, where we declare who you are, the God of all creation, and where we're going to take our stand to worship you with everything that we have and everything that we are. And God, I pray that we'd also worship you financially right now. This is an act of worship. And God, there may be some who need to come and just worship you in prayer, to cry out to you for the slavery they've been in, or to give you glory for the slavery you've freed them from, to come and ask you a question at the altar, to let you give them guidance in life. Whatever it is, becomes an act of worship when we give it to you. God, we want to honor you in this closing time. So Lord, receive it as worship. We pray this in your holy name. And all of God's people said, amen. Let's worship together.